Welcome back to the Wealth Witches podcast. I'm your host, Katelyn Magnuson. Today we have David Edey as our special guest. He's a certified executor advisor with over 35 years of experience in the financial planning industry, specializing in estate and legacy planning. He is the author of the best-selling book, Executor Help: How to Settle an Estate, Pick an Executor, and Avoid Family Fights, and hosts the Executor Help podcast, Stories of Life, Death, and Legacy. Today, we're going to be talking all about how to keep peace in the family, talking about inheritance. So, David, welcome. I'm very excited to finally have you here after life has gotten in the way.
That's correct, Katelyn. Thank you so much for the invitation, and this is going to be fun. It's probably the least sexiest topic that you're going to talk about, but it's the topic that most people don't want to talk about, especially in families, because there's going to be people listening to us and going, "What are they talking about? Our family's perfect. We don't have any issues." I'm going to set this at the top of the show here. All families are messy, and we're going to get into it.
Okay, wonderful. I have all of my own experiences, both in my family, my husband's family, my parents, but I would love to hear from you. Where do we even start with this conversation? How do we go about it? How do we navigate it? What do we need to know?
Well, first off, where the problem lies is that most people, not even the family, but most people just want to avoid the topic of death or planning for it. So they either want to avoid it, they procrastinate and say, "Oh, we'll get to it, we'll get to it." Or there's the family that'll say, "You know what? We understand that this is going to happen." Oh, actually, spoiler alert, we're all going to die. So I don't want to spoil that for anybody. So the families that realize that this is going to happen, it happens all the time, is that they prepare the next generation. So they talk about leaving legacies. Think of a legacy like the ending of a movie where you have the credits rolling. That's what your legacy about. What do you want to have said about you, and what do you want to pass on to the next generation? So those families who take the time to have the conversations, and I'm not going to say it's going to go smoothly because it's not, because again, all families are messy. Everybody's got their own little issues. And the earlier and the easiest that they make it in terms of these conversations, the better off it'll be for the family down in the future.
I couldn't agree more. And we have some experience in our family of both of those. And I will say, David, we share the inevitables of death and taxes. So you can bring the death side, we bring the tax side.
Yeah,
You can't really get out of either of them at the end of the day.
absolutely, absolutely. Those are the two assurances: death and taxes.
Yes, they are. So let's say I'll even use my family as an example, or my extended family, I should say. My husband has been trying to speak with his parents for years. They're in their 70s now. He's less concerned with the monetary. Neither of us are concerned with the monetary inheritance. We're more concerned with their wishes, their, as you said, legacy. What are they wanting? What matters to them? And we keep getting the brush off of there's money for you in the will. You guys will be fine. Everything's set. But there's no actual conversation. And I have this to compare with my parents, who unfortunately have gone through the passing of several of their elders, parent, very close family friend, and they've been handling their estates with no trust, nothing else set up. And my parents did the really wonderful thing about 2 years ago, and they went through and they got everything set up. They did their medical POAs, they have the trust done, they have the whole thing that they could do to make it easier for my sister and I when they do pass. We're still able to have those conversations with them. And so it's been this really interesting dichotomy in our own family, my husband and myself, dealing with each of our parents and how they navigate those topics respectively. So, what kind of approach do you recommend when you're sort of running into a stone wall with families of we don't want to talk about it?
Again, it's good. You got two dichotomies: your family and then your husband's family. In your case, I would take it one step further. Even though you know that you've had those conversations, I assume that you and your sister are the executors. Okay, so that means the two of you have to get along. So I assume your relationship with your sister is goes well. Okay, so that's fine. So what you're to take it one step further, even though your parents have prepared you, they need to prepare you even more, because what's going to be thrown upon you is probably the worst job in your life, becoming an executor. On average, it takes anywhere to over 100 hours to settle an estate, anywhere between 18 to 24 months. In my case, it took 7 years, 10 court appearances, and $50,000 to settle the estate, and my parents had a will. So what you need to do is be prepared as the executor and have that conversation with the testator, which would be your parents, to prepare you and your sister for everything that needs to not to be left to chance, so that you know exactly what they want. So hopefully they have ongoing conversations, because these are the conversations you have to have ongoing. It's not like we did it once and forget about it. So
Hmm.
that's one side. So on your husband's side, he needs to broach the subject. Maybe the two of you say, Katelyn and I, we just updated our estate and we're just having conversations. Hey, mom, dad, what do you want when it comes to your funeral? And like, well, just get, or you can use an example. You heard, recently when it came to the actor that just passed away in New Mexico,
Gene Hackman?
Gene Hackman. That's exactly. So okay,
Yes.
so we're going. So in the case of Gene Hackman, here we have an individual that's saying, well, he has a lot of money, he must be organized. Well, actually, he was organized. He did have a will, but it was done from 15 years ago.
Right.
And the problem is that who he named as an executor, they had passed away. So first executor was going to be his wife. She's gone. The next executor was a lawyer, I believe, and he's gone. So that now has led to a problem in terms of settling the estate, because now the beneficiaries that are left behind, if there was anything left behind, now they have to deal with the courts. So
Okay.
your husband might say, hey, did you hear the problems they're having with the Gene Hackman estate? And I'm like, oh, I didn't. And you got to figure out a way to how to bring up the conversation. There's no way around it. Or if it has to get to the point where your husband says, hey, mom and dad, you're going to leave us disorganized and in chaos if we don't have these conversations. So just do it bit by bit, but it has to be done, because what your parents have done in terms of preparing you and your sister, that's the greatest gift of love that they could give you. They don't want to see you guys fighting. They don't want to leave you disorganized and in chaos, because the first thing that's going to happen, and that's actually in the first chapter of my book, is the grief. It's going to be the grief of losing your parents. And all this other stuff, selling the estate and that stuff, that's all the business stuff. That's all the nonsense. But you're going to have
Hmm.
to deal with the loss of your parents. So why not make it as easy as possible on the executors or the people that you're leaving behind to look after those things? Make it as easy as possible to make the transition in terms of the estate. So I always say that a legacy isn't what you leave people, but how you leave them. So do you want to leave a legacy, or do you want to leave a legacy and a mess?
Right. I'm really grateful for that. They experienced a mess with the individuals that they went through, and that firsthand experience is what caused them to start pursuing making it easier on the two of us for when they do pass. And I do consider that to be a real gift from them, all things considered. I mean, it's a weird way to phrase it, but it really is what
It
it
is.
feels
It's a gift.
like.
It's a gift of
Yeah.
love. And you also going to remember them even, a lot of times people will do stuff and they say, well,
Mm,
I don't want to get into the conversations because I'm going to be dead and what will it matter? But you know what? What you'll be remembered for is what you didn't do. You didn't prepare us. We didn't know what you wanted at your funeral. We didn't know where your investments were held. We didn't know your
hmm.
digital assets. We could talk a little bit about, your logins and your passwords. And now we're scrambling around. We didn't know about where, you keep your Netflix and your Amazon and your social media. If that's all organized, that's the greatest gift of love, because they've made it easier on you and your sister. On your
Yeah.
husband's side, this is going to take a little bit of, it might get uncomfortable, but it has to be done.
I think that's really good advice. I actually really like coming at it from the Gene Hackman angle because I feel like I mean, we're going to just call it the Gene Hackman angle because of their personal circumstances and who they have as the executor for their will. They have one person and she's older than they are. And it's always been kind of a point of contention for why would that be the logical choice at the end of the day and being able to kind of have that discussion. So I think that's a good way to come about it.
It's funny you should say that about, the individual is older. I was talking to a client yesterday, and, I said, it's time to update. And I hadn't talked to him in a while. And I said, well, by the way, what's going on with your will and estate and stuff like that? And I asked, when's the last time you looked at it? She said, my husband says, oh, everything is great. And I said, what does that mean? She goes, we did it 15 years ago. And I said, really? I said, then who's the executor? Well, my husband's 67 and his sister, who's the executor, she's 75. I said, well, don't you think that that calls for an update? So, even though you have a will and you have an estate plan, you not only have to have the conversations, but you also have to update it, because life changes and people in your life changes, and especially when it's affecting your estate and your will, you need to make sure that it's up to date and you have everything in place. So maybe it's a cause for having a new conversation. So, so and so who's older than you, suppose she gets sick, suppose something happens. If she's gone and then they haven't updated it, then their will is going to be a mess, because then it'll be left back for the beneficiaries to now go to court because there's no executor.
Exactly. What else, when we're having conversations with our family about inheritance, what else should we be discussing and making sure that we're covering with them that may not be common knowledge or common sense?
It depends on the dynamics of the family. When it comes to inheritance, is it just to the beneficiaries, or do they have any social causes they would like to leave? Those sort of open conversations. And in my case, we ended up having to go to court, even though I'm an advisor. I always had clients in my office, helping them out, doing their estate planning, having the lawyer. The day my parents came in, and that's where our family fell down, is even though I knew it was in the will, it's supposed to be split three ways, and you
Hmm.
figure equal, it's supposed to be fair. One of the siblings didn't think that way. So we had to end up going to court. But if my parents would have said to us, sat us down and said, okay, it's split three ways and this is what we want, then we would never have been in court. But so it comes down to the conversations. They want a certain amount of dollars left to us. They want something left to charities, and everybody understands. So there's no questioning. So when it comes to be a beneficiary, it also comes down to your financial literacy. What sort of education do you have? Because if you have all this sudden wealth, it's been known to what they call brain bust. If you have all this wealth all of a sudden, it could be overwhelming, and you may not be able to handle all this money coming to you, and it could be gone, in a couple of months, in a couple of years. Because if you have no financial literacy and haven't had a history of, investing, paying off your debts and those sort of things like that, and make sure that money grows, then that can be also a problem as well. So maybe the mom and dad or whoever it is that's passing down, maybe help the beneficiaries when it comes to the inheritance. Where you're going to come into this money, would you like to talk to an advisor, a tax
Hmm.
planner, these sort of things, so that at least when that money does come to them, they've already in the process of working with a professional to make sure they make the right money decisions.
I feel like that's similar to, you hear stories of these lottery winners that win the lottery and then end up, spending through all of it and being right back where they were a few years later because they've never lived with and understood how to manage that type of wealth that's sort of been bestowed upon them.
Yeah, that sudden wealth it's a blessing and also can become a curse. So it's the question of the education going forward. So in your case, when you're talking about how do we talk to the inheritors, you want to also make sure you're passing on the knowledge of what does good money management look like.
I feel like this is such an emotionally charged topic, potentially, depending on the family, depending on the individuals that are involved, and it can drudge up a lot of a lot of everything. How do you navigate these conversations without, having someone get too emotional or too heated or too, I would hate to see, and we're seeing it with someone that I know, where it's almost like they're waiting. This sounds horrible. They're waiting for an individual to pass, and there are people that in the family of this individual that are trying to get them to change their will prior to them passing. And it's just a really crummy situation to be seeing. And so that I mean, you might just have really crappy people at some point in time that pop up that you can't avoid. But in families, like I don't want to see that happen, say in my husband's family, and there's potential for contention amongst some family members there. How can this be headed off or addressed prior to, the parents actually being in their later years of life?
Well, that's going to come down to the conversations. Again, we come
Hmm.
back to that. What's that? What's those two words I said? Oh, three words. Families are messy. So, and that's the problem. And it's not because the money is going to become a factor. What you've got, depending on how the family has, grown over the years, there's always one problem person, some child, some little narcissist. There's somebody who's going to be, I'm not going to use the word, who's going to be a pain in the ass. And
We are an explicit podcast, so you can use whatever words you would like.
okay, they're an asshole. So they There's one. There's one in every family. I got one. Everybody has one. And and you can see as we get older and now this is in terms of the evolution of the family, you see that parents are getting older. Now we're talking about, we're not talking about vacations and high school leaving and that sort of stuff, graduations. We're talking about mature things now, adult things that what you young people say today. And I'm sounding old. Anyway, so we're now talking about inheritances and things like that. And if you've always been, one of those people and you've always been a problem person, they've always had issues in the family, those issues aren't going to go away. They're just going to
Hmm.
come back when there's an inheritance. I always say that you never know about somebody until you have to share an inheritance with them. And that becomes really prevalent when, there's a death, people handle grief differently, and then there's money involved. Okay. And there becomes a sense of entitlement. I use myself as an example. That sense of entitlement, because you figure it should be split three ways, but in somebody's eyes, no, they think they deserve two-thirds. For some reason, there's going to be a problem. So now that's why it's even more important to have those family meetings, conversations, do it at a relaxed atmosphere, maybe over a dinner or over the holidays. Not at, I wouldn't suggest, by the way, I've changed my will, pass the gravy, you're not in it. I wouldn't suggest that, but you maybe wait a day or so and everybody's sitting around and having a casual conversation and bring that up. And then again, it's not a conversation you're going to do once and it's going to and you don't do it
Hmm.
again. It might come up a couple of other times, but you start the ball rolling saying, you know what, we're making some changes to will, we're getting older, and some people will want to put their hands over their ears and go, la 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 la, I don't want to hear talk about, you mom and dad dying. I'll use myself as an example. Like the day my parents had the will done, like I said before, I always would sit in with clients. I could
Hmm.
not sit in the room and talk about my parents not being there and passing away. I miss their voices every day, and that's probably one of the biggest mistakes where we've ended up where we are, that the three of us haven't spent the holidays together since my parents passed away over a decade ago. So you need to figure out, as the head of the family, how do you want the family to continue? So that means it's going to have the conversations. Some people may not want to hear them, but that doesn't matter. If you're the head of the family and you want to make sure that it continues in that path, and that's also the reason why some families or parents don't want to have those conversations because they know that some of those kids they raise an asshole. So they know they need to figure out, okay, how am I going to get around this? But this conversation has to be done. So if you have those conversations, when time does come,
Hmm.
nobody can come back and say, "Oh, I'm surprised. I didn't know, this is what they wanted," or "I think this is what they wanted." Don't let the paperwork do the talking for you. It's great to have a will, but if you don't have the conversations, it doesn't really mean anything.
I think that's, yeah, I think that's really important to be doing. You've inspired me for my side of the family. I feel very comfortable having the conversations with and discussing them. And I like to do them in person when I do see my parents. They live back in Oregon, as does my sister. And so I think those are things that we try to bring up about once a year right now so that we can kind of touch base, make sure there's been no real changes. My parents, whether it's right or wrong, divulge any and all health concerns, even if they're not relevant to my sister. Right? We know everything because they came from families that did not divulge any information to them, or parents
Right.
that were very, very secretive, very private, and that made things very difficult. So they've kind of overcompensated. But I think that continuing with those conversations with my family will be really important. And for my husband's family in this case, giving him some tools to be able to further work with his parents. Because at the end of the day, I want him and anyone that's listening really to be able to have the space as much as possible to be able to actually grieve the loss.
And that's what it's about. All this stuff, it's not going to matter. What's going to matter is how you're going to be remembered. And you're going to be grieving. And the last thing you want to be thinking about is, oh, did so and so go in the house and take dishes? And as an executor, you've got to be mindful of that because people lose their minds. I know of stories of people have passed away and the executor didn't, change the locks and neighbors and other family members go in the house and start taking up stuff and saying, oh, well, they would have wanted me to have that. No, you're an executor, change them locks right away and grieve and you as the executor have to work at your own pace to get it's got to get done, but you work at your own pace. And the only other thing I would also suggest if you're going to be the executor is if there's other beneficiaries, you need to communicate with them because all it takes is a little bit of radio silence, a week or two or something. They don't hear anything from you. They think you're up to something. What's going
Mm.
on? And they don't think twice to want to haul you into court or try to have you taken off of being executor. So I can tell you hundreds and hundreds of stories of executors, people telling me the nonsense that they had to gone through. I mean, even my case, I got to go to court 10 times. People say, oh, well, you'll go to court. I can tell you, going to court is not like an episode of Law and Order. It's not done in 48 minutes. You are sitting in hallways and you're going once, twice, and I went 10 times. And then on top of that, you're also scratching checks to the lawyers. And where do you think that money's coming from? That money's going to come out it's going to come not going to come out directly out of the estate, but that's going to come out of your portion when it does get to you because you've spent this money and all you've done is replenish that money with what you're getting from the estate. So, have open conversations. Yes, people are going to be difficult, but the worst case scenario, we ended up having to go to mediation as well. That's where we had to end up going. So the easiest thing is have those family conversations. You guys are doing the right things.
Where do you start as an executor with that? Like you mentioned changing the locks, right? But I'm assuming it would be really helpful to, the goal would be prior to the individual or individuals, having passed, you as the executor have this idea of, okay, I have this list or I have this book, or maybe I have your book and it's here and it has where I need to get started
Right.
so that when that does happen, you're not trying to scramble to make your to-do list right then and there. Is that something that would make sense to sort of have prepared before as well?
Yes, well, that's what you'd want to do. Prepare your executor. That's part of what's in my book and also my website where I have a free checklist for executors of things that they need or someone who's preparing their estate. I was talking to an individual last week and she was an executor. So within a 5 month period, she lost her mother, she lost her mother's companion, and she lost her
Oh,
husband.
wow.
Okay, within a 5 month period. And she was also the executor of her husband's estate. She's now into year four, and there's over 345 tasks that she had to do to settle her husband's estate. Now she's in Canada, and he's American, so he had dual citizenship. So she's got to deal with CRA here in Canada, and then she's got to deal with the IRS. So there's 345 tasks that she has to deal with. So that's why in my book I talk about you need the basic team of advisors. You need the lawyer, you need an accountant, and you need a financial advisor to keep you organized. At any point, you're probably going to need 16 other professionals to help you sell the estate because you're going to need a real estate agent. You're going to need
Hmm.
someone who's going to empty the house. You're going to need, if there's somebody, the house needs to be updated. So it becomes a whole, and you as the executor dealing with grief have to handle all of those tasks. And on top of that, you've got beneficiaries that are only interested in where's my check?
Right.
When am I getting my money? Why is it taking so long? They don't know that you've got to file with the IRS or here in Canada, CRA, and you've got to make sure because you, as the executor, you are legally held responsible for the estate. So if the taxes are filed wrong or whatever, it's the executor that they can come back on.
Yeah. All of the responsibility and all of the grief and everyone beating down your door.
Yeah. Didn't I just tell you this is the worst job anybody could ask you?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you did. Yes,
So
you
now,
did.
so, so you see my point. And people who ask, this is the biggest favor you're going to ask of somebody. And then, people will take on the job like, yeah, okay, I'll be your executive because they feel it's a badge of honor. 85, 90% of most people have no idea what they're getting involved with. And then on top of that, I keep bringing it back. You've got beneficiaries who are just a pain in the ass.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. So on the flip side of that, if you have a will or you have a trust or you've been doing your estate planning, how often should that be reviewed in an ideal world and updated?
Anytime there's a change in your life, you were married and now you're divorced. Change the will. You want to change that. You've got kids. You want to change the will, put in there for guardians. You always want to be, anytime there's any changes in your life and your circumstances, then you should review your will, review your power of attorney. But the funny thing is, we're talking about wills like everybody's got a will. In Canada and US, probably between 50 to 55% of most people don't have a will. So we're
Mhm.
talking as if people have them all the time. They don't. And I think if you don't have a will, you're making the choice to say, you know what? I think I want the government to be my executor. And we know how well that's going to go. So why don't I just leave it to the government to look after my stuff when I'm gone? Or there's two choices. You could say, "Yeah, I'm going to go to a lawyer," and then some people say, "I don't want to go to a lawyer; it's too expensive." Again, depending on the size of your estate and there's questions you want to ask, then don't go to a lawyer. But if you have a large estate, you've got a lot of assets and beneficiaries, and you don't know, and you're worried about the taxes and that sort of stuff, that by all means, go to a lawyer. The second thing is there are plenty of great online solutions that you can have your will done, which is totally legal and binding. And it's do it yourself and just do it. There's one called Legal Wills. There's other ones on online that you could do. The important thing is to have a will, so you have no excuse. You could go to a lawyer or do it yourself. The point is you need to have it done. Again, you can choose to leave a legacy or a mess and have the government as your executor if that's what you want.
I think that's a good point to have addressed that not everyone has one, and that if maybe you've been putting it off, that's something you should look at prioritizing doing because it is a gift to yourself, anyone that's being left behind, and actually directs your funds or estate funds anywhere you would actually want them going. I know for myself, we're child free by choice. And that was definitely something that we went over when we were looking at, where would we want. We have some charitable organizations that we'd be making contributions to, and what kind of a legacy are we leaving? Because that was really important to us versus, my parents making sure that they were taking care of my sister and I when they do pass and setting things up for us. So I think that's something to be considering as well. Because I feel like a lot of times child-free people may be like, well, why would I need to do it? I don't have anyone that's inheriting, but it's still your estate. It's still what you've worked for. What do you want to leave?
Exactly. Why not leave it to causes that you believe in? Maybe it's for animals, it could be anything. Whatever something that's important to you, that could be your legacy that you leave behind. Maybe you set up a trust and every year they get a certain amount of dollars to that particular charity. I mean, there's endless ways that you can, leave a legacy behind. But the point is, if you don't, you're just leaving it to the government. So
Hmm.
now maybe your cousin Jody, who you never spoke to, all of a sudden she could come and petition and say, well, Kaylee and I, we were buddies and blah, blah, blah. Who knows? It just, all of a sudden you'll have people coming out of the woodworks that you didn't want involved. But just by having the will, you get to say exactly what kind of legacy you want to leave behind.
Absolutely. I think those are all really important. What else comes up with this that you've seen that you could help people to avoid? I know that we're speaking very generally because each family is their own specific beautiful mess. But what have you seen that has popped up that you would advise someone here to be able to help navigate around it that we haven't already covered?
I think we've covered everything. The only thing is just to be something that a lot of people don't think about is their digital assets. I mentioned that a little bit earlier,
Yes, I wanted to
but
talk about that. Yeah.
the digital assets, I mean, for every email address, there's probably about 160 online digital identities related to that email address. So, what do you think would happen? You pass away and we can't get into your online banking. We can't shut down Facebook and Instagram and Amazon and any other things that you have going through monthly that you use your online accounts for. So, you need to, that's prepare the executor, is have all your logins and your passwords put on a separate sheet so that they know how to get into them and access them. How do you get into your cell phone? What's the password to get into your cell phone? A friend of mine, she passed away 3 years ago, Linda, from cancer, and I could tell that her husband, who's the executor, had no idea about her social media because recently it popped up, say happy birthday to Linda on
Uh,
Facebook and on LinkedIn. Her job anniversary popped up. So all of those things you want to shut down, and each social media company has its own protocol in terms of how do you want it to be shut down. So You need to, have logins and passwords as part of your estate. And people don't really think about it. But, and I say digital, it's everything you've ever created or done online. And especially if you're, you might be an individual and have all those logins and passwords. But what if you run a business? You've got a whole separate logins and passwords of that too. So you need to make that easier on the executor to have all those things in place that you have access
Absolutely.
to them.
No, I think that's really important. I went through a few years ago for my business and created kind of what I call the red button plan so that if anything were to happen to me, my husband has all of the logins and he can get into anywhere that he needs to in there should it be necessary. But I know that our parents have the faded password book that lives in a specific room where most things are written down, but I do think that there are probably some pretty big gaps in what's missing that needs to be added into there. I think it's something that's really easy to forget. You think about the bigger things and the house or the vehicles or the tangible items, and I think the digital is spoken about a lot less. And I mean, to the extent that
And
it
it's
matters
and
now,
it's relatively
crypto.
new, but people don't
Yeah,
think about that it's slowly crept into. Because so when with your parents, there was no internet when we were
right.
growing up and all this stuff. So maybe they do have the passwords or whatever, but they just wrote them down. So what I do, I advocate for is that we have a bright colored envelope and you put in there the will, power of attorney, investment statement or something, all the things that an executor is going to need to know. Put that in a
Hmm.
brightly colored envelope and say, and let the executor know, if something was to happen, look for that bright orange, bright yellow envelope. The reason why I say that is a friend of mine, his parents, his dad got hit by a car and his mom was in the hospital. She had a stroke
Oh my
and
gosh.
she couldn't speak. So they didn't even know if there was a will. So there's 7 kids, and they had to go into the house and look through the house, come find out that there is no will. But his point was, when people are traumatized and they're looking for a file or a will or anything like that, they can't find it because you're traumatized. So make it
Hmm.
as easy as possible on that individual. So put in all of that important information after all into that bright colored envelope, and then have the conversations with the individuals that you need to have them with.
Absolutely. I think that's a really great tip and something that even if you had it all prepared, being able to find it easily when you are in that space of grief or trauma is how can we make it again, it comes back to how can we make it easier on those that we're leaving behind at the end
Absolutely.
of the day. I think that's really truly such a kind act to do and things that you may not have even thought of because I don't think I'm going to actually ask my parents to do the same thing because I know where it is, but I guarantee you it's in a manila folder in the desk
Among
with
the
all the
other
other
manila folders
manila
that could be in the
folders.
house.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, in
But
the various filing cabinets. So yes, it would be significantly faster if it was very brightly colored.
a brightly colored envelope, so in there, and so if the first couple, if something is to happen, do we have a funeral? Is there something organized for a
Yeah,
funeral? What do they want? If I go in that bright colored orange envelope, I said, I know if it's in there. Like you have your red button, but now for your husband, have a big red file. Something
right.
happens, everything's in there, and make it easier. Again, you're traumatized. You're stricken with grief, and oh, I don't know where the papers are, and you're running around the house. So
Yeah,
you just want to make it easier, and that's why I said this is the greatest gift of love that you can leave for your family.
absolutely. I couldn't agree more with that. I think we covered a very, very nice overview of what to be thinking about. I think a lot of our listeners maybe have had a little bit of a brush with this, but haven't necessarily pushed this topic as far as they should have. I know that even though I've pushed it where I have, where we still have some work to be done on my side of the family, I feel like I have a really nice action item moving forward. And I'm also going to make sure we link your freebie for that checklist as well, because I know I'm going to go download that. What else? Where else can we find you? I know we have your book that will link, we have your podcast, we have
If
the
you just
freebie.
if you just go to davidedey.com, and right on there it's got a readiness quiz. So it
Okay.
asks you questions where you stand, and it'll give you a point system of what you need to work on. But if you go in the resources section on the website, click on there. There is a checklist for what the executor needs to be concerned about. So if you're the executor or you're preparing your estate, and make it easier for your executor, you just put that in your brightly colored envelope so the executor knows, okay, these are the things I have to start off with. So I've got one for US residents and one for Canadian
Hmm.
residents. And then if on my social, if you have any questions, you can reach out to me and or listen to my podcast where we talk about life, death, and legacy.
I am really excited. I love a good quiz, especially a productive quiz. I'm of the generation that grew up taking all the funny, silly BuzzFeed quizzes. And so I feel like, a sucker for it. David, I really appreciate it. We'll have everything linked in here so everyone can come find you. I'm going to go make sure I check out the quiz and the checklist because those will be really useful. And then I'm going to go make sure to download the podcast because I think that will be beneficial for myself and my family. So, David, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Katelyn.
That's a wrap for this episode of the Wealth Witches podcast. I hope our magical money talks have left you feeling empowered and inspired. Remember, wealth isn't just about dollars in the bank, it's about abundance and financial freedom in all aspects of your life. I'm Katelyn Magnuson, encouraging you to keep challenging the status quo and embrace your inner witch on this financial journey. Until next time, stay magical.